So, let's see here. Make sure I got the agenda up, and then I'll get started. Minutes. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm ready to get started. It's after 7, so I'll go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Albany on Wednesday, May 11th, 2022. And I'll note that all the commissioners are present except for Commissioner Moman, who is excused. And next we have the ex parte communications. Do any of the commissioners have any ex parte communications to disclose at this time?
No.
Okay, seeing head nods, and I do not have any either. So we'll move on from item 3 to item 4, which is the consent calendar. These will be usually considered routine and enacted one motion unless a member of the commission or a member of the public wishes to pull an item. Does any member of the commission wish to pull an item for discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to pull the minutes for a quick notation.
Okay, and just let me see really quickly if any member of the public wishes to pull an item for discussion. I see one hand. Are you wanting to pull an item for discussion? Jeremiah Garrett Pinguello?
Yes, Chair Pilch. The one was on Santa Fe, the 800 residents on Santa Fe, with 813 or something.
Okay, very good. Hold tight, we'll get to that in a moment. So bringing it back to the commission, you have some comments, Commissioner Donaldson, on the minutes?
Yeah, on page 6, the the second paragraph, starting at line 4 and running to line 9, is part of the previous meeting's minutes and should be deleted. So it had to do with an entire other project. So that whole paragraph is doesn't need to be there.
Okay. Staff.
With that change, I could move to approve the minutes then.
Okay. Well, let's just see how we do on the Santa Fe first, but the staff has that correction?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, and let's move to the other item, the PA 22-023 design review and parking exception for lower level conversion at 813 Santa Fe Avenue. Jeremiah, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I was wondering what the square footage is going to be for the bedroom. It doesn't specify the square footage of the bedroom specifically. It just kind of just says a general total square footage. I think it was like 200 something square feet. And so I'm trying to figure out what the size of that bedroom is going to be. I hope it's big enough. And then I'm going to ask, what's the smallest square footage bedroom allowed to build?
Okay, thank you for your comment and questions. I'll bring it back to the commission then and see if staff is able to answer that question if we have that data in front of us, or that data and or policy.
So,
we have the data on. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, the bedroom, lower level, the new bedroom number 3, the area is not specifically called out, but it's the dimensions are called out at 9 foot, 1 3/4 inches by around another, let's say 10 feet and some change. So that does meet the minimum dimensions required for a bedroom.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're back at, I'm sorry, Jeremiah, you had your comment and your question, and now we'll bring it back to.
What is the minimum square footage for a bedroom?
I believe the minimum dimensions are 7 feet by 10 feet. And that's per the building code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have problems with 813 Santa Fe, and I'm prepared to move approval.
Okay, would you like to just go ahead?
Actually, that would mean, what I want to do actually is move approval of the consent calendar. Yeah.
Second.
Okay.
With your requested changes.
Yes, with
To the
the
minutes.
requested change to the minutes.
Okay. Very good. We have a motion and a second. I'll just ask, I'm trying to make this even quicker now. I'll just ask if there's anyone voting no or abstaining. Otherwise, it's approved unanimously by the 4 commissioners.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to item 5, which is announcements and communications. I saw that there was a item here, 5.1, but no attachments. Is this an oral presentation by staff?
I do have one announcement regarding the project that you reviewed at your last meeting, the 1600 Solano Avenue. The tentative schedule, it hasn't been finalized and posted yet, but the schedule is for a special meeting of the City Council on June 1st. That's a Wednesday. And then the notices for that will be going out towards the end of next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have an announcement or communication at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to public comments. This is the portion of the agenda where we ask if a member of the public wishes to comment on an item not on the agenda. And I do see we have one hand raised.
Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so I was just wondering what this commission is doing for towards housing. You know, there's vacant lots in Albany. There's abandoned houses. There's one right there on Adams behind Solano. You know, and if we don't do anything about it, we're just going to have, you know, breaking enterings, you know, transients can possibly start squatting in there. I mean, which is in a sense okay, because homeless people need a place to stay, but it'd be nice if it was, you know, all legit. You know, I don't know what to do because there's actually an abandoned house right on Marin. You know, and there's a lot of abandoned houses in Albany that are just not being used. And, you know, I know from past experience that a house could be turned over to the kids after someone dies. And, you know, the brothers and sisters might not get along and the house just sits there for another generation. And I'm just kind of wondering what we're going to do, how we're going to move forward, because, you know, it's just kind of sad that they're just sitting there. And also I was wondering what's going on if the public can get an update on that house with all the rats on Albany Hill. I forget what street that was, but, you know, I'm still concerned about that. And has the city found a solution, or is it just kind of fallen off, you know, a talking point? I haven't heard about it for a while in any meetings. And so I'm just wondering if anybody found a solution for that. Is the house, you know, condemned? Is it red tagged kind of thing? Has it been fumigated? There's a lot of neighbors around there complaining about it. You know, I saw something on the news today about rats in New York City. So I just want to get a control on rats in Albany before it gets out of hand. And I think that's it. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have one more hand raised at this time.
Brian Martin, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I had this was actually a question for staff. I see some public comment has been posted for item 7.2, but no public comment has been posted for item 7.3, but I know there was at least one thing that was submitted before the deadline because I submitted it before the deadline for item 7.3. So I was wondering if all the public comment has been posted to the agenda for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Could staff comment on the public comments?
If the comment was received today, it's possible that we might have missed it, but it will be posted by the end of tomorrow at latest.
Okay. All right. That's a little bit disturbing since it's normally for transparency, we want to make sure we adhere to our rules about posting comments on items in the agenda. So perhaps Brian Martin can comment later on when that agenda item comes up and summarize his communication. And if staff could do everything in its power to get that communication posted as soon as possible, that would be great. Okay, thank you. So that concludes our public comment and the item 6, and we will move on then to item 7, discussion and possible actions on matters related to the following items. Item 7.1, the first one, design review and parking exception for a second-story addition at 1046 Pomona Avenue. Staff?
Just one moment while I share my screen. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm the Associate Planner for the city. Before you tonight is Planning Application 22-001, a design review and parking exception request for a second-story addition at 1046 Pomona Avenue. Some background on the property. The subject property is a 3,600 square foot lot with a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,410 square foot house built in 1926. City records show minor work done to the property, notably a design review request for a 60 square foot addition in 2015, and an admin design review approval for a new garage in 2017, and an ADU approval in 2017 as well, though the ADU project was not pursued construction-wise. Here's a street view of the property as it sits today. Project request. The applicant seeking 2 entitlements from the commission tonight. Design review for the second-story addition directly above the main level. The addition is proposed to include 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a primary bedroom suite, and also a parking exception to locate 1 off-street parking space in the front yard triggered by the project scope. Here's an existing elevation of the home. Here's the proposed front elevation. And here are 3D renderings provided by the applicant. Storm drain. There's a 16-inch storm drain that runs east-west on the south side of the property, which is part of a network of storm drains that captures water in the southeast portion of the city. As part of the special conditions of approval, staff's recommending that the following conditions be placed on the building permit as part of the permit issuance. These conditions include the presence of the storm drain shall be recorded as part of the property records as maintained by Alameda County's Recorder's Office, that the design and structural elements of the project shall be prepared by a licensed structural engineer to ensure that the weight of the structure will not impact the storm drain. And lastly, that the new construction shall not impede sufficient access to the storm drain in the event of inspection, repair, or replacement of the facility if required. And here's a snapshot of the site survey for the subject property. You'll see the hash line indicates the the sewer reserve right here, or the stormwater pipe reserve. The project is subject to exceptional design as reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some exceptional design treatments included for this project were retaining the existing architectural of the style of the home, proposing cement plaster siding with a gable and hip roof forms to match the existing architecture. Cladding on the north wall projection on the second story is proposed to be horizontal wood paneling to contrast the cement plaster siding. A new wood deck is proposed on the ground floor at the rear of the home, and a new balcony on the second floor is proposed directly above that and off the primary bedroom suite. Indicated in the staff report, staff proposed the following project refinements that the commission could consider. There are two of them. The first is preparing a landscape plan that complements the proposed architecture and the front yard parking space proposal and incorporate drought tolerant plants as well as attractive hardscaping. The second would be possibly modifying the proposed windows to be either wood clad fiberglass windows or purely wood windows, as the use of vinyl windows is highly discouraged by the residential design guidelines. And the applicant is also seeking a parking exception. There is existing parking in a detached garage located at the rear of the property, which accommodates one parking space. The project scope triggers one off-street parking requirement due to the addition exceeding 240 square feet in area. And section 2028-040A8B of the Albany Municipal Code requires that front yard parking spaces meet the minimum dimensions of 7 foot 6 inches by 16 feet in length if a parking exception is to be granted. And with that, the applicant is seeking approval for the parking exception from the commission to allow parking, one off-street parking space in the front yard. Staff has not received any correspondences regarding the project proposal. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA review pursuant to section 15303 of the CEQA guidelines. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and approve the proposed projects subject to the findings and conditions of approval. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Did the project applicant or architect wish to present at this time or no?
Yes, I see the project architect has his hand raised. I'll let him speak.
Hi, Philip Moss for the owners of the property at 1046 Pomona. First, I want to thank Christopher for excellent job he's done on this. And also Jeff, because he helped us work out a solution for this drain pipe along the side property line. I just want to correct one thing. There really is no reserve, and that's where we ran into some problems. Even though our surveyor thought there was a reserve, when we checked the records, there was no reserve. But we understand it's there and we're going to work with it and work around it. So we've actually moved most of the house, the addition, off that property line. So it's actually going to have the existing wall goes up and it's going to step in for the second story. So we're going to have a little bit more of a setback along there. I know one of the conditions was concerned that they'll be able to access that pipe, and by offsetting the addition, we'll be able to access that pipe. This is a couple that are going to have an extended family in this house, and that's mainly what's driving this addition. A couple of years ago, we were going to do an ADU for the extended family, but we decided that it would be better to have a garage, which they've built a new garage, and put the extended family inside the present home. And so that's what drove the program for this project. As far as the landscaping, unfortunately, the one that is on Google Earth is older photograph. And if you look at the pole photographs, you'll see that the landscaping is mainly drought tolerant landscaping. But we can work with a landscape designer to come up with a complete landscape plan for the front. So other than that, we agree to all the conditions that have been set forth on the project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do my commissioners have questions? Looks like Commissioner Donaldson, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Phil. I'm still here. You haven't been here for a long time. I do have a question. So will you explain, are you talking about the south wall on the offset there? Is the sewer run then on the south, along the south wall?
Right.
And is that why you don't feel that you can make a vertical extension of that existing south wall because of the sewer easement? Will you explain that a little bit better for me? Mm-hmm.
Well, it's twofold, Doug, and yeah, it's been 6 years since I've been off the commission, but what it is the we wanted to set back the house on that side so we could have windows, operable windows facing the south. And by code, you have to have them so far off the property line. That also helps, in my mind, helps make that south elevation appear a little bit nicer, having that offset right there on the second floor. And it also then now also gives room for any equipment that has to go in there and maintain that pipe, room to excavate out. So it actually was a benefit in a lot of ways, but I won't tell Jeff that having that pipe there is a benefit.
Okay, thanks. Mm-hmm.
All right, anyone else with questions? If not, if no other questions from commissioners, we can go to public comment. So please allow, we have 2 hands raised, I believe, for public comment.
Yes, Brian Martin, please go ahead.
Oh, so sorry. I think I never put my hand down. Thank you.
Okay.
In that case, Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. So everything really looks good. I guess I just have some general questions just for some general understanding about things. So we're building a second story. It's a lot of weight. I noticed the house was almost 100 years old. Congratulations. Now I was just thinking about the foundation on a 100-year-old house. Is like the foundation able to support that much extra weight? And my second question, just a general question, is when we're doing these second stories and things like that, is the house, located on a fault line that's like a specified fault line that we know about? So I was just thinking about, earthquakes in the foundation, just building a second story. I'm not saying anything bad about it. I would love for it to be built. It adds an extra room. And a third question. Here we go. So I'll save this for another thing because it's kind of getting off topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see the architect has his hand raised again. I don't know if he wanted to comment on anything.
I would just like to respond to Jeremiah. You are right, Jeremiah. The foundation, a normal foundation would not handle a second story like this. When we did the 60 square foot addition, we beefed up that foundation to carry a second floor, but we will be beefing up the rest of the foundation to carry the second floor. And we will be bringing it up to current seismic standards in doing that. In fact, this is going to be above current codes because we have to take the foundation deeper along the south side to not put any weight on that existing storm pipe. So we will be excavating and going down behind that pipe. And probably in that case, I've talked to some engineers about that and they all feel it's fine. It won't affect the pipe if we go below it. We'll be alongside of it, about 12 to 14 inches off of it, and then we'll go down past it. So we'll be eliminating any weight on that pipe. As far as fault lines, Albany, this is no closer than any other location in Albany to a fault, which is usually right along the Arlington. It's the closest I know of, but we feel pretty comfortable with seismic on this location.
All right. Thank you very much for that. And I'll note that usually engineering considerations like this are handled by the staff in that process. So normally we trust staff to ask and have answered all those appropriate questions. So thank you. Let's go to Commissioner comments then, bringing it back to the Commission. And Commissioner Donaldson, you are first.
Actually, I raised my hand because I thought of another question for the architect, for Phil Moss, while Jeremiah was talking. So could I ask Phil about the front entrance? There's a very attractive archway that fits into the architecture, the existing architecture. And I noticed that you've changed the configuration of the front entrance, and that column on the north side of the little entry porch will be gone. Can you tell me a little bit about why you think that's necessary and why you're doing that?
The owners requested that be done that way. And one of the reasons it's kind of complicated, but one of the reasons is we had to pull that out to get the stair in to go to the second story. And so it was either that or tear out a brand new kitchen that they had put in 5 years ago and get a stair up. So it was easier to move that out. And we still have a slight recess there, but not a full 4 feet recess. The side archway we're converting into a window and leaving it as an arch window. Okay, all right. Another question I thought of. The front window, existing front window is very attractive with a nice design of the mullions, not equidistant, but got kind of framing around the edges. And your drawings don't show that. They show more of a standard window. I couldn't tell from the drawings if you're planning to replace that main front window or if the existing configuration will stay. Mm-hmm. No, the existing configuration will stay. It must have been my drafting error.
Okay.
It's remaining just the way it is, even with the diamond above it, all stays. We're not touching the lower floor.
Okay, thanks. Mm-hmm. Great. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Waddy.
Thank you. I'll just happy to kick off some comments here as well. Overall, I think this is a well-designed vertical addition. Again, I really do love it when we're able to preserve a little bit of the architectural style of the existing homes, but then adapt them for contemporary and expanding family needs. And I think you've done a really nice job of balancing the two, differentiating it a bit from the original, but also still having it be contextual. And I know that's often a fine needle to thread. So just wanted to commend you on that. There were 3 quick items that I think have mostly been touched on a little bit, but not all of them, just points of clarification. And the first, just for staff, I think there was an error in the staff report under the parking exception paragraph on page 6, because it says that the parking exception will result in a total of 2 off-street parking spaces. And I think that is in error. I think it's resulting in only 1, if I understood the presentation right. So just wanted to highlight that so that we can correct that in the final record. And just 2 other things to note as we noodled in on windows, and usually if we're only talking about windows, you've done a pretty darn good job. I support the condition of approval requiring that they not be vinyl and instead move to either fiberglass or wood, but I would also add in aluminum clad as an option. I wouldn't want that to be precluded as an option. I think that is still a high quality compatible material for the architectural style of the home. So just would want to add that into the condition of approval. And then similarly, the window detail that's on the plans shows that the 2-inch reveal is from the face of the trim instead of the face of the exterior cladding of the wall. And just want to reiterate that I know the condition of approval says from the outside face of the wall, but just want to make sure that the plans get updated to reflect that as well. With those 3 changes, which I think are all pretty de minimis in nature, I'm very supportive of this project and can support both the exceptional design and parking exception. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McLeod, did you have any comments? Oh, you're still...
Sorry, I would agree 100% with Commissioner Wadi's comments. And I would echo what was mentioned earlier about requiring a landscape plan, and that could be submitted to staff a little later. Yeah, I like the design overall. I think it's attractive. You know, the only thing to my eye that looks a little awkward is a little bump out over the stairs in the front. It just looks a little too small with the big roof on it. I don't know. It just looks a little awkward as a design element to me, but you know, I wouldn't necessarily want to make any kind of conditions of approval regarding that, but just a comment. Otherwise, yeah, it looks attractive. I think it's going to be a nice house to live in for the family. And I understand the reason for pulling back the upper floor. That makes perfect sense to want to be able to put normal windows in there, even though it creates a little bit more of a structural problem to support a wall, not over another wall, but with a beam or something. And I sympathize with the culvert or drain pipe issue. I have a creek culvert going under my property. We had to design around it, but the engineering is perfectly capable of not harming that. So that's not a problem at all. Anything else? No, I would support the project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner.
Sorry, I have one last thing. Yeah, I would support changing or requiring either fiberglass or aluminum clad windows. Wood windows are an option, but we generally don't do them because they're not as durable. So I think for durability, aluminum clad or fiberglass are better. So that would be my only other observation. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have some design review concerns. I don't think they're shared by others, and I think I could probably support the project. I was bothered by the offsetting of the entire second floor, shifting it to the north. I understand the necessity for that, but I don't think aesthetically it's all that attractive. I would rather have seen that south wall extended vertically, like the house 2 stories down. That'd be what, 1042. Like Commissioner McLeod, I'm a little bit bothered by the stairway protruding out over the front and with a large roof on it. I think it'll be acceptable, but I just find the design having just a lot overly detailed, too many. It's just, it kind of bothers me that way. I love the existing front of the house. It's very simple. With that diamond decoration above the front window and the nice style of the existing front window. I don't know. I'm not sure that protruding stairwell is going to be very attractive. But I don't have any options to offer. I think that those stairs probably do need to be there. I'm also sad to see the archway over the front door, around the front door go, but I think I understand why that's necessary as well. I think I can support it. I guess I'll go along and just say that with some reservations. I'm okay with the parking exception. I can support that. And I support the other commissioners' recommendations for the change out of away from the vinyl windows. And that's it. I think I'll be okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't really have anything to add. I think it's a fine project, and I appreciate my fellow commissioners' comments about some of the details, but I would support Commissioner Wadi's comments and her ideas about conditions of approval. And so if we don't have anything further, if we don't have any further discussion, I wondered if Commissioner Wadi wanted to make that a concrete motion.
Sure thing. Let me just see if I can toggle back to the agenda here, which is always the hard thing on one screen. But happy to do that. Yes, I will go ahead and move planning application 22-001, design review and parking exception at 1046 Pomona with the conditions as read into the record and proposed by staff, with the addition to include the allowance for aluminum clad windows as well. And I think that was the extent of net new conditions that weren't read into the record. So with that, that will be the motion.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Okay, Commissioner McLeod, I see your hand raised, so I'll take that as a second. All right, and do we have any further comments on the project or the motion? If not, I'll just ask if there's anyone who is opposed to the motion or abstaining from the motion. If not, then I'll take the silence as affirmation that we all vote yes on the project, so that passes unanimously, 4 yeses. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to the architect for coming and presenting to us. All right, we will move on to item, I have to find my agenda, here we go. Item 7.2, conditional use permit for the East Bay Dog Service Play Yard at Caltrans Buchanan Parcel, FLA-04-ALA-080-07. Staff, did you have a presentation? Lance, looks like you do.
Yes, thank you. We have an interesting application before the commission tonight. Once again, this is a conditional use permit request for East Bay Dog Service Play Yard at a vacant Caltrans parcel at the bottom of Buchanan. Some background on the property. The subject property is a freeway lease area owned by Caltrans that is an empty lot by the freeway and located in the CMX zoning district. Caltrans refers to this parcel as mentioned previously. The city has never received a formal project request for this specific site before, and so this is new territory for us. Here's just a snapshot of the zoning code, and you'll see the parcel is zoned CMX. And here's a site map provided by Caltrans. The dotted hash line shows the area that Caltrans is willing to lease to the project applicant. Here's an additional map showing that on a macro scale and then zoomed in. And then this site map is provided by the applicant earlier today. The black rectangle here shows where the proposed fencing is going to be in place. And so that shows the limits basically of the business operations. Business information. The applicant is proposing to establish a dog play yard to accommodate dog walking, training, and puppy socials. The business is proposed to operate under the name East Bay Dog Service. The hours of operation are proposed to be 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. A maximum of 4 employees and 15 people/dogs are proposed on site at any given time. New fencing is proposed, as mentioned previously. No buildings or structures are proposed to be built in conjunction with the business operation. Project requests. As mentioned, the proposed business is atypical. It's not something we typically see and does not fall into a specific permitted land use. The most appropriate category is possibly services personal, as indicated in Table 1 permitted land uses by district, which is contained within Section 2012-040 of the Albany Municipal Code. Regardless, all new uses proposed in the CMX zoning district do require a use permit of some sort in order to operate lawfully. The applicant is seeking approval from the commission for a conditional use permit to operate the dog service play yard. Parking. No off-street parking is provided for the patrons of this business as indicated by the applicant. Dogs are proposed to be picked up from their homes by the business operators and brought to the subject property to engage in business operations. Off-street parking requirements are determined by specific land use and the amount of building area typically, and the building area typically allocated to a specific tenant space. Therefore, because there are no buildings on sites and due to the lack of clarity in the zoning code regarding such proposed uses, staff has determined that there are no parking requirements based on the business model as well for the dog play yard. Staff has actually received a few correspondences. The slide was prepared earlier. One supporting the dog business, but possibly suggesting other uses, and another one proposing various other uses, as well as some other questions into the business operations. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA requirements pursuant to section 15301 existing facilities and 15304 minor alterations to land of the CEQA site guidelines. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and approve the proposed project subject to the findings and conditions of approval. I see that the project applicant is also in the attendance tonight. I just wanted to mention that in a previous email earlier today, the project applicant indicated that they may want to modify the maximum proposed business operational hours, as well as possibly the number of employees, but I will let the applicant speak on that directly if that sentiment is still shared. And with that, staff is happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we go ahead and let the applicant present at this time then?
Sure. Dominique, you can speak whenever you're ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. First of all, I would like to thank you for having me, and thank you, Chris, for being accessible and being so prompt with all of my inquiries. I saw on the agenda the land acknowledgement statement. I'm assuming that's usually stated at the beginning, but I really appreciated seeing that there as a Native American woman and descendant of the Arapaho tribe. Having visibility here really makes me feel, welcomed in the community. So I would like to thank you guys for that. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about this idea. Our business has been in operation for 10 years, and we've been really successful so far, but we are hoping to expand that opportunity by bringing something unique to Albany.
Okay, thank you. And would you care to speak to the suggested changes that you were discussing today with staff?
Yes, so in my initial proposal, I said 4 humans or handlers, employees, and 15 dogs, but we are now operating with more dogs than that at this point. And for us to grow, I don't want to be limited to this number, only because I'm afraid it would stunt the business from growing and thriving as I expect it to. So I was hoping, even if we don't make this number each day, we would be able to operate with 8 employees and up to 30 dogs at a time. I don't think we'll get to that number, but I just want to make it a larger number so that we don't get stunted by the original proposal number.
Okay, thank you. And thank you also for recognizing that I failed to read the land acknowledgement. Apologies for that. I had been reading it, but just skipped over it today. But we had been reading that at every meeting.
No, I appreciate that. It's my first time here, and I'm really excited to just see what this is all about. So,
all right. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. And so why don't I open up to questions from the commissioners for the staff and/or applicant? Do we have any questions? Not seeing any raised hands, but if not, I have some questions. I'll go ahead since I'm not seeing my fellow commissioners. Yeah, I did wonder, the application says 4 handlers and then 15 people/dogs. I didn't quite understand what that meant. I assume that actually means dogs and not people/dogs.
correct.
Okay, very good. And then I don't, in our materials, I don't think we have, it's not called out how the parcel would be used exactly, whether or not there'd be a certain area for running, a certain area for training, or other uses. Is that correct? That is not detailed out?
It is not detailed out, and I don't know why I left that out, but I would like to, within the parameters that I've scoped out, I'm hoping to have an area about 50 yards. So about the entirety of a half of a football field. And then within the area that we occupy, section it out for dog play, training, and maybe not a permanent agility course, but be able to offer that if we want to bring those materials to the location.
Okay, thank you for that. And then finally, it was mentioned that the dogs will be picked up from the owners and brought to the site. But I'm at least, if the intention is that they not be walked there, then it does seem like there will at least be some drop-off needed, and then someone will have to take the vehicle off-site, or maybe there is need for one parking space for bringing in the dogs. And so I wondered if you want to address that.
Yeah, so that's kind of a funny thing that I've been trying to navigate and figure out with Christopher. And my original plan and my primary plan is to use the access road off of East Shore Highway. As you are on Buchanan, you turn left onto East Shore, and then to the right, there is an access road that was originally used for dock and drop off for that business. And then as you turn to the left, there's that cul-de-sac. Although it says no parking on the roadway down to that cul-de-sac, there is not any no parking signs along the cul-de-sac. So my want would be to have the employees park there, because that would be the safest way to get the dogs that are already leashed in the car out safely away from any version of traffic and use that bike path to go directly into the play yard space. There was some comment and discussion from Christopher about a parking assessment. Because this land is on its own, it's not associated with that cul-de-sac. It's kind of a funny gray area, but that's where I would love to be able to utilize parking space. I just don't know if I can claim it. And I didn't convey that to you because I just didn't know. So I chose to leave it out. The alternative is the Pivot Point Park and Ride, which is directly across the street from the space that we're looking at. And it is open during the operating hours that I've proposed. It is enclosed. We would just pay to park, unload there, and use the crosswalk to get to this space. However, ideally, we would like to use the other access road. So there is a way to park. It's just, I'm not sure how we can get it to be ours.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. And I see Commissioner Donaldson has a question.
Yeah, a couple little things. Let's see. First of all, I want to acknowledge I saw the videos that you'd sent in earlier today. I hope I don't know if other commissioners caught that in time or not, but I appreciate the videos of your driving in to show us where the two parking points would be. Nick brought up the question of the 15 people, dogs. You clarified that, but I interpreted that to mean that maybe you were thinking of doing some training down there that would involve the dog owners or the dog guardians, I guess you should say. And I'm just want to clarify if that's the case at all. So would there be other times where it would be more people than just the handlers, your staff people, down there working with the dogs?
Yeah, you're right. There would probably, that number should include human people as well. because eventually we would like to provide that where the owner could obviously learn alongside their dog. We haven't offered training sessions yet. Of course, we would do it on a smaller scale initially. It's just not a threshold we've done currently in our business now. Yeah, so I would like to increase the number of people that would access the space.
Okay.
For that feature.
Okay, good. Thank you. Another question I have. Will you confirm that you're pretty sure you have a deal with Caltrans?
Yes. Okay. So the Caltrans story is really funny. So I connected with them at the beginning of 2020. They were excited about this opportunity because they would love to see the space used, but they didn't want. I feel like they agreed to let me rent it because they didn't want a lot of impact on that property. And they felt like, just erecting a fence and putting wood chips down would be minimal, impact. So they told me that any other city, or if they wanted to, they could rent it to me, but it would be, wise to get permission from the city for approval, which made complete sense to me as well. And they only required that you or the city write off approval so that they can turn around and approve leasing to us as well. So they just want to have, full disclosure, this is who we're renting it to. You guys, you think that this is a proper use of the space. But there has nothing been signed yet until you write it off. Even after that approval is stamped, they will do one more inquiry with their environmental division, which, will take a couple of weeks. But they expect, because we aren't building anything, we're not, digging into the ground or anything crazy, that it'll be approved by them as well.
It might take more than a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well, she started the process a few weeks ago.
Yeah, personal experience. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject really quick and say that staff has had communication with at least 2 different staff members at Caltrans that have verified that they do indeed consent to leasing the area contingent upon city approval.
Good. Thanks, Christopher. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, I was just curious, the area under the overpass, that's Caltrans land as well, or is that City of Albany regulated land? It's not our Albany roadway, is it? Or is it purely Caltrans?
Oh, I'm not certain. I don't know. I thought it was City of Albany regulated land. In fact, when I had gone down there last week, I was checking it out with a friend who would help me if this were to move forward. And an officer came down and he said that road was actually intended to be blocked off. Christopher, you said that another department had that conversation, but maybe it wasn't gonna materialize.
Yeah, I believe there were talks with the Public Works Department with potentially doing that, but as of now, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but that's not going forward due to various reasons. And so at the moment, it will be open as is for the near future.
Right. Looking at the map, it looks like the parcel, although it encroaches onto the bike path, it stops at the Buchanan, north side of the Buchanan street. So I don't think it's Caltrans property.
Jeff, do you know? Is that part of our Albany roadways, or?
The as you've seen in the diagrams, the is a very complicated parcel layout, but it's essentially, as I understand it, the bridge it's a city bridge. And so the land underneath it is a city roadway. And with respect to the closing off that roadway, we sometimes call it the roadway to nowhere. We have had historically a dumping problem, and so the idea was to put up some, and it doesn't go to anywhere. The idea would be to put up some bollards to just keep people out of there. We did apply for a grant. Apparently, we didn't receive that grant, so right now we don't have funding for that. We're thinking, rethinking that strategy. If and when that happens, we'll work with the applicant to figure out what works best. It's not, and I don't see that as an insurmountable issue if and when we do something to control the dumping problem that we have there.
I kind of feel like also if we are present there, and I would happily keep that area clean as well, it would maybe deter graffiti and dumping, as long as, folks are coming in and out and the space is being utilized regularly.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, for commissioners and public benefit, you probably noticed that the power came back on here, so I'm good to go. And Commissioner Donaldson.
When I've been down there exploring, it looks to me like that road does provide access to the loading area for the tile business down there. So there is one customer or one client that's served by that roadway. Then it's on the edge of the other side of the overcrossing, not directly under the overcrossing, but there's a gate there and a fence there and a loading dock, it looks to me like, at the back of that building. So just want to make that comment. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Donaldson. And are there any more questions at this time before we go to public comment? Seeing none from the commissioners, why don't we go ahead and let the public in, please?
Okay. Brian Martin, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Brian Martin, resident of Albany, also a member of the Parks, Recreation Open Space Commission. It's not clear to me this item should be before the Planning and Zoning Commission, whose scope is very narrow. I requested the city attorney weigh in on whether or not this can be moved to the city council for a broader discussion about this unique request to run a business in public open space that the Parks Commission itself has been considering for public projects as well. I asked staff to respond to the scope of what is being addressed here, and whether or not this can be passed on to the city council for a more thorough discussion. I request the project be denied on the grounds that it's as much as we'd like to support a local business owner, and as much as I love my dog and love to take it for walks, this is far from what I would consider the greatest good for that land. For example, the business owner says this fenced dog area will serve a few dozen households who want this service and can afford it. If the same fenced area was leased by the city for a dog area, leased from Caltrans by the city for a dog area, it could serve everyone for free. And then if this is going forward, I have some questions, for example, from the business owner. What are the costs in terms of the conditions of the lease? Does the leased land extend to the loop of the path and the other paths? And does the business owner plan on obstructing those paths or building things or setting up things in those areas? Also, the land is rough and weedy. Will it be leveled? Will it be pesticides and herbicides applied? I asked for clarity from staff how to determine the no parking requirements, given that the business owner specifically says employees will be driving to the location. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
There we go. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
All right. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one saying the same thing here. Glad I got some other public comments. So is this the first reading or the second reading of this. Also, how would anybody get to the small part of the triangle on the north end that's doesn't look like it's going to be used? Kind of looks like that small triangle is going to be blocked off. And so, yeah, so what Parks and Recs and Open Space? Why is this not brought to the Park Recs and Open Space Commission? You know, there's things about a mountain bike park. There's a lot of public involvement. We had over 20, 30 public comments about this same area. We had kids and parents talking about it. So, you know, what kind of insurance kind of thing if a dog attacks my dog? You know, is there water access down there? Is there electricity access? What's going to be happening with all the dog poop? Is this going to be ADA accessible? And some of my concerns are, right, it's open space. And my idea was there was going to be a city dog park, just like a Memorial Park, right? So this would be another dog park that would be free for the public. You know, but now it looks like we're going to have it a private business, and then the business might say, hey, you know, maybe we'll give a senior citizen discount, maybe we'll give a student discount, maybe we'll give a pandemic discount because everybody's broke. I just don't know how you're going to make a bunch of money with dogs. But, you know, I'm just wondering, what is the cost that this person is actually leasing this property from Caltrans per month? $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. Sounds like the applicant got a pretty good deal. And so I was wondering if it's possible that the city can lease the property from Caltrans like it was going to be, and then have it be an open dog park for the community. And then this applicant can just sublease from the city of Albany for certain hours or something, and then leave it available for someone else to you know, have a dog business or whatever. Because I think Memorial Park is, you can't run businesses like that. This whole thing kind of sounds a little sketchy. Why it was brought to this commission, I don't know. And what about garbage service down there? Is there going to be garbage service to pick up all the dog feces? Is there an address? What's the address? And then what about an environmental report? You know, what's in that dirt? Are there saw blades in that dirt? You know, who knows what's in that dirt? And how are you going to do business? Are you going to do cash? What kind of receipts? And how much are you going to charge per hour? And also, street parking is public.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Julia Chang Frank, please go ahead.
Hi, commissioners. I'm Julia Chang Frank, resident of Albany, also a Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commissioner since 2016. I'm really here to just raise this issue that Brian Martin also raised about the use of this as a commercial business. Brian and I have both been sat on the commission through numerous different discussions about how to make use of our very limited open space in Albany. You know, we just went through a master planning process, and if I'm not mistaken, we might have even identified this area as one of the few, you know, open space areas that we hope we could, you know, strike a deal with Caltrans and get them to maybe allow us to have some sort of recreational activity there. There was some time ago where there was a discussion about, I think, a mountain bike park, and the comment was, oh, Caltrans doesn't want to talk about this right now. It's going to be very hard. So we just thought it was like a non-starter to even do any kind of development on Caltrans at that time. If, you know, perhaps the applicant has talked to a new staff member at Caltrans and they're more open, they don't know the history. My real concern is, you know, I have no problem with what the applicant is proposing to use it for, if it was already designated sort of as a city to be something that we could never potentially use as an open space. We have such limited space in our city parks. so little that we can't even really plan for anything. We can only substitute out, existing recreation for new recreation. We can never think about expanding because we have so limited space. So I think it would be really short-sighted to not bring this to the level of the city council and really understand this issue, what our options are as a city, because we really can't turn back. I mean, I really feel badly that the applicant has gone this far if we don't go through this, but I do think we need to just consider as a city, is this our priority? Is our priority to allow for development? And I understand that it's not designated our land, but if we did have some intent of striking a deal with Caltrans to make an open space use for all, I really think we should pursue that. I don't see how we can reverse it if we choose to go forward with the application approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And that's the last of the public comment. I see that the applicant has her hand raised, but I just want to say that now would be the time that we deliberate on this as a body, so we typically don't have a back and forth with the applicant. However, if the applicant would like to answer some of the questions that came up in public comment, I'll give the applicant a chance to do so now, but just to be aware that we will not be having a dialogue after that. So please go ahead, Dominique.
Thank you, and understood. I was forwarded the concerns by the other department, and I thank you for the information. I've attached a site map. I responded to Christopher regarding that, and no, there will be no obstruction. We will not encroach upon the bike path. We have no interest in, destructing that area or making it hard for anybody to access the bike path. Everything that we will be doing will be within the fencing that we've shown. We are striving to be an eco-friendly business where we will utilize the program Chip Drop, where arborists who have done tree trimmings in the community have a place to drop chips, because what we will be doing with the overgrown weedy area, as discussed, is mow it all down and lay wood chips down to protect the dog's feet, and also that'll be a natural way to keep weeds from growing up. We will continue to maintain the property that way. Chip drop is free. Arborists can send their chips to us, and we will distribute them to keep the area clean and clear. No pesticides will be used. No weed block weed herbicides will be used. That would be very irresponsible for dogs and people. In terms of the poop, we have a strict pack it in, pack it out protocol. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with seeing my business in Albany, but each walker walks about five dogs each, and we pick up all the dog poop along the way. We are on leash currently. We've been in business for 10 years and have seen exponential growth throughout that time. I know it's hard for some people to believe that you can make money off of pet care, but it's a hugely growing business, especially for the past 10 years. We grow at least 6% each year. In terms of providing something for the community, I mean, I can't say and present now that there's something more that we can do aside from offering some free events, which I would love to do. But again, that is also contingent on how people will access us. Hoping pivot point parking will be sufficient along with the access way. And I feel like offering employment to people who have to be outside, who may have suffered from COVID, afraid of getting sick, we are offering employment in a safe environment with outdoor work. The amount of people who are in our community who are now opting for dogs as opposed to children, we are used as their daycare system. And, we want to bring safety to the community. We want to bring employment to the community. We want to bring friendly dogs to the community. I can understand why some people may think that this is kind of a narrow niche thing, but I would also like to possibly give back to those shelters who want their dogs to run. Maybe down the line, we can offer adoption programs at the site where people can come and adopt a dog. I'm very open to other ways to serve the community. And that's something that I strive for in my own small business. Yeah. And I feel like the access to Point Isabel and the Bulb are wonderful places to take your dog with plenty of room to run on with their owners.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. So we'll bring it back to commission now for deliberations, and does anyone want to start? Go ahead, Commissioner Wadi.
Great, thank you. I actually realized I do have a couple of questions just for staff on this one, if either Chris or Jeff are still around. And this is just sort of maybe my ignorance on all the different permitting options that we have in Albany, but is there any way for this to be like a revocable or a temporary use type permit? Is that something that would be an option as opposed to just a conditional use authorization or permit outright?
You can always put a time limit or a review period on it. You could say we want to review it 3 months, 6 months, whatever, after the start of operations, and we could have a public hearing on that as you wish. If we ever were to encounter something where it's really creating a nuisance or environmental damage or something like that, we wouldn't wait we'd bring that back to you we would take the initiative to bring that back to you right away.
And what if there weren't necessarily any issues per se, but the city at a certain point does decide that they want to, work with Caltrans to develop this for some other, greater public use. And, they've been a perfect tenant, but we just feel like maybe it needs to expire effectively or terminate in that sense.
Right. I would expect that once we see what the final agreement with Caltrans is, that, maybe we should terminate the use permit at the time of the termination of the agreement with Caltrans, so that we have an opportunity, if this were to be approved by the commission, if we'd have an opportunity to review that again.
Okay, great.
When it's kind of open, there's an open opportunity for us to engage with Caltrans as well.
And then do you guys have any sense of whether this land has been identified on any other city agency or city commission work program? Or is it identified in the general plan anywhere, or is it identified anywhere, anyhow, sort of for public use at this time?
I haven't seen it in any formal plans or programs. I am aware that there's been some interest in doing all sorts of different things underneath the 580 overpass on the Cleveland side of the interchange. I at least haven't seen this in our Parks Master, this specific parcel pulled out in the Parks Master Plan that was recently approved. Now, perhaps there was some discussions in the course of preparing that. I wasn't part of that. So, but in the final document as it stands today, there's nothing in there about this particular parcel.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. I guess just sort of turning back to my comments generally, I don't totally disagree with some of the public commentary, especially just the general concept of the privatization of public lands as sort of a general philosophy and sort of good planning policy, whether it's sort of local land or state lands. I do think there should be sort of a slant towards use for the public and for any member of the public, not having to be a paying member of the public per se, especially if that's the primary use, not sort of a little ancillary, coffee hut or something like that, but really sort of it being closed for a private profit-making business, I do generally have some concerns about. What I'm trying to weigh here is sort of that against sort of the pragmatic of it is just a dirt piece of land at this moment in time that is not really used for any other purpose. And it seems, you know, that there could maybe be an opportunity here to strike a balance or a compromise, really respecting the public's concerns and sort of some of the concerns that I have about the long-term privatization. But especially the fact that, you know, as somebody who works in government myself, even if we wanted this to be a thing, making this parcel a thing for government is going to take several years of getting something on a work program, getting the funding, building whatever said thing is, whether that's a public dog park or just a regular park or whatever the creative ideas are. We're not going to be, if it's not already identified, I would hedge my bets that we're looking at a minimum of 2 years before anything could ever become real. And that would have to be with a lot of focus on it to start with. So for those reasons, there's part of me that would be supportive of authorizing this with a really defined term limit. You know, my only hesitation with that is, you know, I know fencing is not cheap, even though it sounds like it could be cheap, especially when you're running a business like a, you know, dog park. And I would want to, you know, make sure that the business owner here would be willing to still put in the investments that they're planning on doing, knowing that this may be a revoked permit in, you know, a 3-year term or something along those lines. So that's sort of where I'm at right now. I'll be candid, I don't know exactly how I would vote on this. I would also certainly be open to a continuance, potentially asking for, you know, a formal, you know, resolution or opinion from the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission to get their input into it, since this is something that's probably a little bit more front and center in their mind about the usability of some of these parcels. Again, knowing that it's not on a work plan, but just hearing from them a little bit about what their future thoughts are for this. But that's sort of the space that I'm sitting in right now. I would certainly love to hear what others are thinking on this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Waddy. Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah. Okay, we're being asked to do a use permit for this project on a unique piece of land. I think that's appropriate, and we need to sort of focus on that. It's interesting to me that the questions have been raised about broader city policies regarding the potential future uses of this land or other uses of this land. And it sounds to me like the Parks and Open Space Commission has been discouraged from really pursuing that, maybe by staff, just because of the difficulty of dealing with Caltrans and probably also because of the financing problems with creating a potential bike park or BMX park or skateboard park. And actually building something down there. So I just want to say that I'm really impressed with the entrepreneurship that this applicant has brought forward here and the creativity. They've actually pursued this with Caltrans and apparently got somewhere. I think it's a pretty slick little project, and I think it's really well thought out. I know that area under the freeway there. I bike down there a lot. I've seen trash down there many times. I've seen strange cars kind of lurking around down there. I've seen the police down there a number of times. I think that bringing some life and some real activity to that spot under the freeway would be a good thing. And having someone go there every day that knows the place, knows the actors, more eyes on the street, as you say, would be a real improvement for that area. I really like their business plan. They pick up the dogs at home. They would bring them there for off-leash work and be able to improve their business that way. So I really admire them for the initiative they've taken in identifying this land and working with Caltrans to make it work out for them. It's interesting to me, they have 2 different parking locations, 2 different ways to access it. I support the primary one of free parking by them underneath the freeway, bringing life to that area. But the alternative is also very viable. I think they really thought it through very carefully, that they can get this built and make this work without a huge capital investment, and that it will become very successful as kind of a privately funded or private alternative to the public chaos that sometimes occurs at Point Isabel and at the Bulb with all the dogs. I really admire the applicant for having pulled this together and brought it to us, and I certainly can support the use permit. I do appreciate Commissioner Waddy's comments and concerns about the overall city question, and the comments from the Parks and Recreation Open Space commissioners. Perhaps they were too quick. Perhaps the city was too quick to dismiss this. But I like Elizabeth's comment that maybe we can put a time limit on this, perhaps to correspond with the lease term. We don't know what that is right now, but at a minimum, I give them 5 years to do this, or 10 years before we say the permit expires, or make it congruent with the Caltrans lease term, whatever that is. But if Caltrans wants to renew the option to renew the lease every year, I don't think that would work for them very well. And I'd go for at least 5 years to let them develop this parcel and use it as proposed. I think it'll be a very successful project, and I think it's properly categorized as a personal service for the citizens of Albany, who are willing to pay for this kind of service, and that it'll be very successful. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, I'd like to, I basically agree with both of the commissioners' comments so far, and I think it would be good to try to strike a balance somehow between the public and private interests. A lot of the public development possibility really depends on Caltrans and their attitude towards more permanent structures or more permanent use. And I think the applicant mentioned that she would be, or Caltrans was considering her because there was minimal impact on the lot, or minimal to zero, or, you could put up the fence and you could take it down in a couple of days if you had to. Whereas a bike park, which would be great, would take a lot of infrastructure, or a skate park, a lot of permanent infrastructure, or much more expensive infrastructure that Caltrans may or may not be willing to accept there. So I think that's the biggest question for going forward with a more public use, would be what would Caltrans accept there, and it would be good to find that out. But in the meantime, we don't have any public projects on that land, planned for that land. There's nothing on the boards. There's nothing on our work plans. So in that sense, I don't really see the harm in going forward with this application and approving it. But I think it would be a good idea to have some kind of time limits. And I think it's already in our general conditions of approval that I was just reading it, would expire 1 year from now, and then it's on page 9 of the staff report. General conditions of approval would have to be renewed after 2 years after that, or the community development director for a period of up to an additional 2 years could approve it. I think 5-year term would be fine. I don't think we want to necessarily go any more than that in case there would be some sort of public project that could be possible there. It would be up to the applicant to gauge whether the investment in the fencing and other equipment would be worth it for 5 years or something like that. But I don't really see any projects. My experience, projects do not happen very fast, and 2 years would seem like kind of an impossibility to get anything approved, built, funded, shovel in the ground. 5 to 10 years seems a more likely time frame for getting these things done. Approval could take 2 to 5 years, and then actually getting funding and starting the project another 3 or 4 years after that. So something about around a 5-year approval period would be fine with me. And I would like to also state my admiration for the applicant for taking the initiative to go to Caltrans and figure this out and get them to agree to it. I think that's pretty impressive. So I guess I can leave it there. I don't know if we would really need to defer to our other commissions or the council. I think if we had a limited time frame that would allow other planning to occur and happen later, I think it would be kind of a balance between the competing public and private interests. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to just jump in real quick before Commissioner Waddy speaks again and say that in general, I think approving a project like this for some period of time, relatively short, would be just fine. But I would perhaps like the City Council to be aware of this. And I am also, although the applicant does seem to have a viable business, a successful business, I am bothered by the lack of details in the application, and and a lot of the details were just presented orally to us today, and some of them came in at the last minute, it seems like. So I prefer to have an application that was more complete. So those are my thoughts so far, and I'll go to Commissioner Waddy.
Sure. Just a quick clarification that maybe Chris or Jeff can clarify, but Commissioner McLeod, when you said the sort of the 1 year reading from the conditions of approval, how I'm reading that is that's just the term for the amount of time by which the applicant needs to pull a permit in order to implement the conditional use permit, not the actual validity. Like if they pull a permit to basically build the fence, then it's approved in perpetuity, and unless we wanted to revoke it, is my understanding.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So we would need to apply a condition of approval if we actually want this to come back for, reconsideration or termination in 5 years or something along those lines.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, fair enough.
Okay, thank you. And I see Commissioner Donaldson has a follow-up.
I'm prepared to make a motion, if that's okay, unless anyone else wants to add further discussion.
It looks like staff to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just in speaking with the project applicant, there was an email exchange, like I mentioned, where she proposed to amend the number of employees and or dogs. I think she also mentioned that she would want to extend possibly the days of operation from not just Monday to Friday, but also possibly weekend days. So I just wanted to see maybe if we could check in with her and see if that's still true. So I was just
yes, that's still true. And I'm curious, Mr. Pilch, I felt like I detailed how we're going to modify the space in the business plan under changes made. I didn't, if you want more clarification, I'm happy to, draft that for you.
Thank you. I may have missed some of that, but thank you for that clarification. Okay, so do we know it sounds like if we're making a motion for approval, it sounds like we want to approve something that's amended from what we have in writing in front of us. So can we clarify once again the exact amendments?
I could do that, I think. If I can make a motion.
Okay.
Can I do that? Okay. I'd like to move approval of planning application 2202, a conditional use permit for the East Bay Dog Service Play Yard at the Caltrans Buchanan parcel FLA 04 ALA 08017 with as described in the staff report and in the application with the following modifications: a maximum of 8 employees instead of 4, a maximum of 30 dogs instead of 15, and a maximum of 7 days a week operation instead of 5. And I would like the permit to run for either 10 years or until the Caltrans lease expires, whichever comes first. And I'll accept modifications if you want.
I'm happy to second that motion.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let me just clarify with the applicant, since the applicant is still here. Were those the change, aside from the number of handlers and number of dogs, was that the correct modification to the number of days or the working hours?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't know if I needed to unmute again. Yes. Now, I know that we had kind of hovered over, we said 30 dogs persons at one time. So with you, Commissioner Donaldson, you made the valid point that if we were to do training sessions, that would include the owners as well. Is there room for me to, do you have to move on this amendment today, or is there room for modification?
Prepared to move on it today.
Okay.
Let me say something here. I didn't say 30 people, dogs.
Right.
Because I have a concern about parking if you have 30 people down there.
All right, let's just do
your approach to parking where you bring the dogs in with the handlers is good.
Okay.
And I think that area can handle up to eight vehicles if you ever had to do that.
Okay.
That'd be even tight. But I would leave it, certainly a maximum of 15 people and 30 dogs, or I'd be silent on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we do have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on that motion or any friendly amendments?
Can I just ask a clarification question regarding, is that 15 people in the motion or not?
Let's leave that. Let's leave a maximum of 15 people. I think we should do that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I'm okay with 30 dogs. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, now I'm a little confused. You originally said 8 handlers.
Correct.
And now you're 30 dogs, and now you're adding 15 people.
Well, it was 15 people / dogs, whatever that meant. That's the confusion. And I want to keep that 15 people maximum in there. And I'm willing to go to 30 dogs as a maximum if her business grows as she hopes. So. Okay.
Okay, I think I understand now. So you're 8 handlers, 8 employees, 15 customer people, and 30 dog customers.
Right.
Okay, got it. All right, and so looks like we have a question or a comment from Commissioner McLeod.
Well, I guess I'm curious to know what the Caltrans lease period would be before I would agree to matching it. I would not vote for that unless I know what that lease period is.
Would you go for 5 years?
I would agree to 5 years. I think that would be adequate time for the Parks and Rec Commission to find out, make inquiries of Caltrans, see what's actually feasible.
Can I ask a question?
If nothing is feasible, then we could extend that after a period of 5 years for another 5 to 10 years or something. But in the meantime, research could be done and we could find out what would be possible there.
Okay, Commissioner McLeod, it looks like the applicant might have an answer for you.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
For the lease period, yes.
So I actually have if the lease period is say like 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, no matter what that timeline would be, the city would revoke my use of the land. And what if my business was very successful? Am I just the placeholder for until the other department finds a better way to use the property?
No, you'd have to come back to planning and zoning for a renewal of the permit.
Right. Okay. So, okay. Gotcha.
Just at the same time, you'd have to go to Caltrans to renew the lease.
Right. Right. Okay.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner McLeod?
Well, no. What is the period of the lease from Caltrans? Number of years, or is it yearly or something like that?
Excuse me. Sorry. So they said to me that I have a choice of month to month, 3 years, or 5 years, and I can choose.
Okay.
Okay.
What would your choice be?
I mean, I would prefer to do it as long as I can. I would like to do a 5-year lease with them.
5 years.
Mhm.
Okay.
That'd be good. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
Well, I would propose modifying the conditions of approval to be 5 years.
As a mover, I accept that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As a seconder, I accept that too. So 5 years is the condition. Okay.
And that could equal her maximum lease, and then they would both be up for renewal at the same time. And I think by then we would definitely have clarity on what could be done. And the short answer to the applicant's question is that yes, you could be asked to leave, and then another use could come along. City use, public use would take your place. So that is a possibility that you would have to be aware of.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second, and we are continuing with discussion. I'll just, Commissioner Donaldson, is your hand still up from
the
last time?
I'll put it down.
Thank you. I'll just say that I'm a bit uncomfortable with hashing this out kind of at the last minute. I'd rather see a more all these terms come back in writing. But I'm not going to stand in the way of my fellow commissioners. This is a successful business who does want to use land which is now currently unused, and having a lease term is good. I would prefer it be 1 or 2 years though, rather than 5 years. But I also don't want to stop a good entrepreneur from making good use of the land. So I assume that, well, I'll just ask Commissioner Donaldson, would you be at all amenable to a permit term of 1 or 2 years?
No, I wouldn't. I think they'd have to have a big investment in the fencing, and that probably wouldn't be able to recoup that in 1 or 2 years. So I think 5 years is right, and I think that if she has an option from a possibility of getting a 5-year lease from Caltrans, and that'll be a good time to review this whole thing. Commissioner Cloud's comment is correct. She could lose the ability to do this if the city, for Parks and Recreation Commission, modifies the plan and has a project that they want to put, that the city wants to put on there. It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would ask staff that the Parks and Rec Commission and the council, city council, be notified of this, of our action tonight. But besides that, like I said, I'm not going to stand in the way. So we do have a motion and a second. Are there any last comments or discussion? If not, I'll just go ahead and ask once again, taking a vote by asking if there's any no votes or any abstentions to this motion. I will not vote no. And so we have unanimous approval of the 5-year permit, 8 handlers, 15 people, customers, and 30 dogs maximum, and 5-year lease term, if I hadn't said that already, or permit term rather. Okay, well, unanimously approved. Thank you to the applicant for coming to us and for this application.
I would like to note, just for the record, your decisions are appealable to the city council. So with payment by anyone, with payment of a fee, and also if a member of the city council wishes to pull this up for review, they may call it for review as well. Those would have to occur in the next 14 days. So
okay.
2 different pathways for further review if that's desired.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay. So moving on, one moment, to item 7.3, which is another portion of our housing element discussion. This is a work session focusing on the analysis of affirmatively furthering fair housing, and could they make it? Could they have made it any more difficult to say? But it's a great principle.
AFFH is the acronym. That's a little easier to say. So good evening, Commissioners. Jeff Vaughn, the Community Development Director. With us this evening, once again, is our consultant, Barry Miller, who's continuing a series of detailed presentations to you and members of the public about the preparation of our housing element. I think if things go as planned, the next time Barry is back, it will be with the whole package more or less together for your more complete review. But this is a very detailed review on a particularly new part of the preparation of the housing element. And I think I'd like to turn it over to Barry to talk about the work he's done here and what it's telling us about housing in Albany. Go ahead, Barry.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff, and good evening, Commissioners. Just want to confirm everyone can see my screen and hear me okay? Great.
Yeah.
As Jeff said, we're here this evening to talk about affirmatively furthering fair housing, which we will refer to as AFFH for short. And this is where we are in terms of our process. We're actually on our 6th study session on the housing element. Starting a little over a year ago, we have gone through really chapter by chapter through the element as it's coming together. And as Jeff mentioned, the next session, the next time you'll be hearing from me will be with all of the policies and programs. And we'd really like to focus our final study session before you hold your public hearings at the end of the year on walking you through the proposed housing programs. And some of those programs are going to be responding to what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the state mandate to affirmatively further fair housing through the local housing element. This is not a new concept. This has actually been part of federal law for about 50 years, and essentially it's a federal mandate to combat housing discrimination and eliminate racial bias and undue segregation, et cetera, in the way that we manage our housing systems. And it has recently become a part of the housing element legislation and something that we have to address through our housing element. We should be doing this. We are doing this. We should be doing this, and this is a way of really making it codified as part of our local policy and housing element. So, in terms of the context for AFFH, this is really a response to what has been a history of disparate treatment of racial and ethnic minorities in the United States over centuries, particularly during the period when Albany was being developed. 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, and so forth. We saw systematic redlining of neighborhoods, restrictive covenants, and limits on access to housing by race and ethnicity, which resulted in inequality in our cities based on race. We did have the 1968 Fair Housing Law at the federal level, which prohibited discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, and national origin. That was later expanded, and the language in that federal law includes now discrimination based on sex, disability, and family status. So although discrimination is federally and prohibited at the state level as well, there are still subtle discrimination, subtle instances of discrimination that are happening in our cities, some of which are unintentional and some of which can be addressed through our policies and programs. So I mentioned the state law, but just to provide some more historic context, this is really what I would say the infamous redlining map of the East Bay. Some of you are maybe familiar with this map. It is from 1937. It's from the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and essentially it is the rating of different neighborhoods based on the risk level for loans, for home loans to these different areas. So the red areas were considered hazardous, the yellow areas considered declining, and so forth. And this is we live with the legacy of historic patterns such as this. And you can see here that Albany, in this area was basically west of Masonic, was designated a declining area in the 1930s. We also saw, and these are the notes that go with those redlining maps, narrative information expressing what constituted a hazard in an area. It was racially motivated, and references to undesirables and so forth in these maps. And this really is what informed lending and who was able to purchase a home, get a mortgage in Albany during that time period. One of the legacies of our past housing policies throughout the United States, and we see this right here in the East Bay, is that we have in communities of color higher rates of homelessness, poverty, disability, and employment, lower rates of graduation, life expectancy, and home ownership, and a lack of access to generational wealth that comes with the ownership of a home and the ability to transfer that wealth to one's children or relatives and so forth. So in 2017, the state passed SB 686. This was called the Santiago Bill, which identified the housing element as a vehicle to address some of these issues. And this is, after all, where we have our local housing policies and presents an opportunity to overcome some of the past patterns of inequity and segregation, reducing barriers, housing barriers for low income and special needs households, which includes households with disabilities, also an opportunity to improve education on fair housing laws, awareness of fair housing laws, both among landlords and among tenants and homeowners, and then also looking at the way that we plan really our land use policies to make sure that our land use policies are not contributing unintentionally to segregation and are promoting more equitable distribution and housing opportunities around the city. We'll talk a little bit about that in a future slide. And then finally, our outreach and engagement. In other words, not just for housing, but for all of our civic processes, how can we engage all our residents in a more meaningful way, including groups that have historically been excluded from our planning processes and discussions. So there are a number of different components to AFFH in the housing element. I'm going to walk through these through a series of slides. I want to point out that the information that was provided in the agenda packet is a work in progress. We thought it would be better to give you that partial draft rather than waiting on that, because you do have a lot of data at your fingertips on how this plays out in Albany, which can help inform the conversation and the decisions. We still have some work to do on the staff and consulting side to reach out to our stakeholders, our community-based organizations, our housing advocacy groups in the community, to really talk with them about what AFFH means and what steps the city of Albany can take to promote fair housing in our policies and programs. But we do have quite a bit of information to think about as we have this conversation. So here are the 4 areas. I'm going to go through each one through follow-up slides. So in terms of our outreach, this is really an opportunity to reach all economic segments of the community. We're looking for ways to engage renters as well as homeowners. Renters represent more than half of the households in Albany right now. Historically, they've not been as engaged as homeowners in the process of planning and planning for housing. So this is really kind of an imperative to engage our renters. Using a variety of methods to engage our residents. So in other words, making sure that we have access on our website, at City Hall, around town, that we're reaching out to stakeholder groups in a number of different ways, that we translate our materials and have our materials available in Spanish, in Chinese, and in other languages that may be spoken in the community. I mentioned working with our community-based organizations, our business community, Chamber of Commerce, our community leaders, and so forth, to make information accessible and not overly technical, trying to distill all of this down to, what does this really mean, and making it a little easier to comprehend all of this. Providing opportunities for folks to participate at different times of the day, so that we have meetings in the daytime, in the evenings, on the weekends, and that we're out in the community talking about this subject, and also to provide ample time for review of some of our draft documents that we will make available. And I should say here that when the housing element is released as a working draft, it will be on the street for 30 days before it's submitted to HCD, and then really on the street for about 6 months before it is adopted as a policy document by the city, because there's a 90-day review by the state, and then we have to make edits in response to state comments, then have planning commission and council hearings. So there will be a long review period for this document once it's out. So we also have to analyze patterns, trends, and conditions in the community along these 5 different areas. And this is really where the state has provided some fairly detailed direction on what they want to see and what they're looking for in the housing element. And it's really what I would call a deep dive, a spatial analysis, not just at the local level, but looking at how Albany fits in with the greater East Bay. Where do we stand at a regional level, and where are we at the local level? So Albany is a small city geographically. The populated urbanized area of the city is only about a square mile. So the analysis is a little bit more meaningful when you look at the city in a larger context. But we're going to go through a series of maps here that are mostly in the staff report, just for some highlights. This is a dot map showing the distribution of different racial groups around the northern part of Alameda County, the southwest part of Contra Costa. Here is Albany right here, and the dots indicate different racial groups. You can see the key over here. Bottom line here is that the city has become more racially integrated over the last 40 years, but our Black and Latino populations remain small relative both to Alameda County and the Bay Area as a whole. You can see here that Albany right now is about 44% white, non-Hispanic, compared to 36% regionally. And we do have a smaller percentage of Black and Latino residents in the city than the region and the county at large. Also, one of the legacies of those earlier maps, we have a lower rate of home ownership among Black and Latinx residents and households than white and Asian residents. I want to point out here the interesting thing is the gap between the local homeownership rates and the Alameda County homeownership rates. If you look at the rates of homeownership among white residents, white non-Latino residents, it's pretty narrow. There's less than a 2 percentage point difference here. But if you look at Black and Latino residents, Albany in the blue bar, County of Alameda in the orange bar, the gap is wider. Among Asian residents, it's quite a bit different. At the county level, about 62% of Asian households are homeowners. In Albany, it's only 43%. So that's an interesting statistical note there. Relative to the region, we have smaller percentages of disabled residents and children living in unmarried couple households or children living in households without two parents present. This is Albany right here. And you can see this particular map is showing the percentage of residents with a disability, relatively low in Albany compared to the regional average. Almost every census tract in the city is below the state average. This is the percentage of households, actually the percentage of children that are living in a household, a married couple household with both parents present, and you can see the rates are relatively high in Albany relative to some of the surrounding communities. For example, West Berkeley, Richmond, and West Oakland have much lower rates. Moving on, this is actually an income map of Albany, and these are census tract block groups. So what you see here is that the eastern part of Albany has a higher income profile than the western part of Albany. This is University Village right here. It's a little bit of an anomaly and a kind of a unique situation because we have a lot of student families living in University Village. So we would expect to see a lower income profile in that area. The area to the north of University Village, west of San Pablo Avenue, also has a relatively low income profile compared to the rest of the city. Kind of interesting statistical analysis there. So this actually moves on to another one of the variables that we need to analyze as part of the AFFH profile, and this looks at the opportunity score. And in the AFFH report, there are separate maps showing education, health, and economic opportunity. This really is intended as a composite of all three of those variables, and it's used to identify what are called high resource communities in the Bay Area. And you can see here Albany is in the dark blue, which is the highest resource area, and in the lighter blue, which is a high resource area. The green, where University Village is located, is considered a moderate resource area. There is no place in the city of Albany, no census tract that is considered a low resource area. So this has a bearing when the RENA numbers came out. The resource area designations were one of the factors that determined your distribution of lower income housing relative to your total RENA, so that the communities that are low resource areas received higher numbers for above moderate income housing. So we also are looking at disproportionate housing incomes. This is another variable, and you can see this is a map showing the percentage of household income that is spent on housing costs for renters by census tract. Albany is this area inside the green line. Interestingly, the northeast part of the city around City Park has the highest rate of renter overpayment in the city. The number of renters in that tract is fairly low, but the average is greater than 60%, greater than 60% of household income spent on rent in that tract. Most of Albany is in the more moderate overpayment, but there's still a significant amount of cost burden among our renters, and it's comparable to what you see in some of the other tracts around the region. The last map I'm going to show you is the sensitive communities map. This is an index that indicates the risk of displacement. So the census tracts in purple are those that have higher percentages of renter households and limited renter protections and rapidly rising rents. So this is kind of an area where the combination of those factors creates a high risk of displacement. And there are 2 tracts in Albany that fall into that category, both located in the area between San Pablo Avenue and the BART tracts, pretty much the entire length of the city. There's a high number of rental units in that area, rapidly rising rents, and those are considered sensitive areas. So the next topic area in the AFFH analysis is really looking at our housing sites and asking if the distribution of those sites contributes to our AFFH goals. It's important that we are not concentrating all of our lower income opportunity sites in lower income tracts or in the same census tracts. So the state has asked that we identify sites in higher resource tracts, so the eastern part of Albany in this case. It's important in our case that we don't concentrate all of our housing opportunity sites on the San Pablo Avenue corridor, although we've talked about this before, that is where many of our housing sites are located. We need to create opportunities in places like Albany Hill and along the Solano Avenue corridor. And I think this kind of speaks to the sites inventory that we talked about a couple of meetings back. It is important that we create opportunities elsewhere. And that includes looking at our single family neighborhoods, making sure that it's viable to create accessory dwelling units and possibly opportunities for duplexes, triplexes, and so forth, and other types of affordable units in some of our more affluent neighborhoods. The last variable we need to look at in the AFFH analysis is what are the contributing factors to furthering fair housing in our community? What are the kind of the root causes of segregation in our community? And here are some of the variables that the state of California has given us. It's things like limited fair housing enforcement and outreach capacity, disparity in access to opportunity, et cetera. So we're asking these questions. How should we prioritize these different factors? And again, this is the state has published guidance for how this is done. I'll tell you that for many of us who have done this kind of work for a long time, this is the first time we've been asked to do this, and everyone is sort of learning as we go in understanding exactly what the state is looking for. One of the reasons that so many of the housing elements in Southern California haven't been certified, I think I've mentioned at our previous meetings that they're ahead of us in the timeline, is that they're not getting this right. And the state is trying, I think, now to clarify what the expectations are for what they want to see cities saying and doing when we address this aspect of AFFH. And what it really is linking our policies and programs to the analysis that's in this chapter. And it's not just having a goal about affirmatively furthering fair housing, it's making it really a thread that runs through all of our policies and programs and demonstrating the link that we've consciously thought about these things and these issues as we drafted our policies and our programs. So what are some examples of how the analysis links back to our housing element? So yes, there are basic nuts and bolts things like increasing outreach and education, but it's also about how can we increase housing vouchers in our community? What steps can we take to reduce displacement and to protect our renters? Affordable housing construction, I mean, that's one of the bread and butter aspects of the housing element. But how can we make sure it actually happens and that it happens in a fair and equitable way? Inclusionary zoning is another example of how we can affirmatively further fair housing, particularly when we're creating mixed income developments where those affordable units are part of a mixed income project. preserving the housing that we have in our community that's less expensive. So we want to make sure that we're not demolishing older housing units, older rental units in an effort to build higher cost housing that won't be affordable to many of our current residents. I mentioned the engagement of tenants and lower income residents in our housing discussions, community benefits, and so on. So this is the final slide. I'm going to leave you with these two discussion questions. And the first is really just to hear general questions, comments, and observations from commissioners about fair housing issues in the city. And the second is ideas from the commission about steps the city can take to improve housing opportunities, reduce discrimination, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. And I'll say that we're posing these questions not just to the commission, but also to the Social and Economic Justice Commission, to some of our stakeholder groups and organizations in the city. And we look forward to your input and thoughts on this topic this evening. Thanks.
Thank you. And just a quick clarification to start off. I noticed that this was described, this part of the document was described as a draft, maybe even there was some other qualifier there. So do you expect perhaps big changes based on feedback, or substantial changes based on feedback once you roll out the complete draft document to this particular section?
The substantial changes are the parts that haven't been written yet. So I think the parts that have been written are not going to substantially change, because it's mostly recounting of factual data, which is what we're required to do under state law. The part that's missing is really the local lens, and what we're hearing from our tenant groups and from our housing groups in the community, and from our elected officials and from commissions. So there's part of the story, we've told part of the story, but there's more of the story to be told, and that's really the missing piece right now.
Okay, thank you for that. So are there any questions from the commissioners before we open it to the public? Go ahead, Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, well, I guess our sort of biggest tool is our zoning, classifications, right? Changing our zoning. I mean, wouldn't that be kind of the biggest tool in our kit to address this in a way, or?
Yes, I would agree with you that's the tool we've traditionally used, and it's the tool that is, I think, in the past we've really relied on to it's the housing element implementation tool, and we will be looking at that. I think we really started talking about that at our last meeting on constraints, but the state wants us to look at other ways that we can encourage this, and I think renter protection and anti-displacement is really the one area where we've been hearing more from the community about, those are urgent needs, and you're not going to address those through zoning.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, let's see. This is hard stuff for me anyway. It's so much data and so many tables and all that. But let me ask a general question, Barry. Maybe I'll put you even on the spot a bit. The very first slide, you talked about the need here in this whole section of AFFH of identifying what barriers we have and then figuring out how to lift them. I think I quote that correctly from the first slide. And can you tell me, as being the person most knowledgeable about all of this data and being most familiar with it, like where do we start here? What are the opportunities for where do you identify the barriers that are biggest for us, and then how do we go about, and what's going to happen next, and when you finish this, and how do we go, what are we going to need to look at for try to lift those barriers?
Thanks, Commissioner Donaldson. I'll confess that I'm also a land use planner like you, and so I can answer that through the land use lens. And it's what Commissioner McLeod just said. It's zoning, and it's the way we tweak our zoning. Where I think we need assistance from our community members is really on other barriers, and it's talking to our housing community and our affordable housing developers. Just as an example, I participated in a forum on affordable housing development in the community, actually this was for Contra Costa County. And they had about a half a dozen affordable housing developers, and that question was posed to them, and their answer was completely different than the answer a planner would have given. They're talking about financing and tax credits and things like that. So I think, for us, it's looking at a variety of barriers. We may have a barrier related to our capacity to enforce fair housing. Maybe it's a staffing need, or it's the dedication of more city resources to renter protection or something along those lines. I think, we're looking for the same answers, I think, that you're bringing up. And, I'll be honest, a lot of what we're doing is looking at the cities where Sacramento has said, meaning state of California has said, here are the model cities. Here are the cities that are doing a good job, that are getting it right, and looking at what they're doing and trying to understand how we can apply some of those best practices locally. Because this is a brand new law, and everyone is kind of looking at each other saying, well, what are you doing to deal with this?
In reading through this, it looked to me like the biggest discrepancy or the biggest issue that propped out to me in the whole report was what was called the cost burden of the housing in Albany. And we know it's very high and must be. And that way it was described, the first thing, I guess, that popped into my mind was like rent control. I don't see a zoning solution to having super high cost of housing. And does this lead to, in that direction of rent control, controversial as it is? Is Richmond going in the right direction with their rent control ordinances? Is this something that we're going to be looking at when the housing element comes to us?
I don't know how far we would go in that direction. That's a city council discussion and conversation, but I think it's really more a value statement that we're going to take steps to avoid displacement, and looking at a menu of what that might involve. And it's really, it's setting us up for a conversation that's going to happen in the future. We have an 8-year planning period, so this is really meant to be some things that may be specific and some things that may be much more general, food for thought, things for the city to explore and look at over the next couple of years. And that may be one.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. And Mr. Miller, so any further questions from commissioners before we go to the public? Being none, let's go ahead and let the members of the public speak.
Thank you. Margie Marks, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Margie, and I'm speaking on behalf of Albany Thrives Together and Albany Uprising. First, we really appreciate that you put in the redlining map from 1937 in the report. I hope you're going to put in more explanation about it, more context around it. Okay, part of what the state wants, and it's already been mentioned here, are anti-displacement measures. And you've talked about it. The 53% of Albany residents who are renters want real rent control and protection from evictions. The Albany Tenants Union, which is newly formed, is circulating a petition right now. It would be great if the city would step up to the plate and put these protections in the housing element. Also, put protections in place similar to what Berkeley has to protect renters who have Section 8 or other rent supplement vouchers. Over 1,000 Albany renters are eligible for Section 8, and it could make a huge difference in their lives. But the city has less than 20 in the entire place. We need to, in our organizations, we're telling those 1,000 renters, go apply for Section 8. It takes 1 or 2 years to get the voucher. Even if it takes you 2 years, in 2 years now you're eligible. And if the landlord doesn't give it to you, we want protections in place to help them. The last housing element had over 400 vacant sites, as does the proposed one. I'm not sure how many are carryovers, but the city should look at some sort of vacancy tax to put towards housing. The Pierce Street parcel, the housing element calls for a ballot measure in the next 3 years to change the zoning for higher densities. Don't wait 3 years. Why don't you put it on the November ballot? Many in the community would like to see another Saha type project on that land. We would go after county, state, federal funding, as well as hound nonprofit builders for another project of that type. So do it in November. Don't wait 3 years. I have questions about many of the parcels identified. How many of the, when I look at all those non-vacant sites, which many of them are, how many of the non-vacant sites are really available for developers? I don't see in the report that they're on sale or that they are available, and maybe I'm just missing it. I didn't go through all of them in great detail, so I might have missed it. We also, if you're going to do translations, being out there in the community, you really need to do Mandarin and Cantonese. There's a big need for that. We need a TOPA program, a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act in Albany that would help tenants purchase their property. I know I've gone over my time because you just started the timer late, so I'm trying to hurry up. We want some sort of land trust. A land trust would help keep the property forever affordable and allow the tenants to build wealth, which is what we want for our tenants here in Albany. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as a social justice commissioner myself, I'm just looking forward to a presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker.
Brian Martin, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Brian Martin, resident. There are a lot of great things in the document, much of which is visualized well in colored maps. The city needs more housing and more affordable housing. I agree that the city has a lot of work to do to ensure there is equity and fairness in policies and process. The city appears to be focusing the vast majority of its new housing targets on one street in town, San Pablo Avenue. As you can see from the data in the draft report, the area at San Pablo Avenue and within a few blocks of it has the most racial diversity, fewest white residents, and lowest income, and was negatively impacted by federal redlining maps. We saw story polls on a proposed project tonight. Can you imagine requiring story polls for one-story buildings on San Pablo Avenue, which will be turned into 8-story buildings on San Pablo Avenue? It sounds ridiculous, right? The reason it's ridiculous is because neighbors are told developers will be able to build 8 stories high by right with no daylight planes, thereby blotting out the sun for half the day, while the homes 1 or more block away from San Pablo Avenue currently require story poles. This is a serious fairness and equity issue. For single-family homes, we see 30-minute debates on location of windows, 30-minute debates on 1 parking space. Meanwhile, people living near San Pablo Avenue face 8-story buildings with hundreds of units, hundreds of bedroom windows facing off, and no parking. This is a serious fairness and equity issue. The city should cease design review for all of these kinds of things in single-family homes. The way the draft report says the city plans to spread development around are a good start, but the city's widest, wealthiest eastern areas are a short walk from public transit and shops, criteria often used for determining incentives for increased housing density. The city at a minimum needs to make sure 4plexes are allowed by right citywide, even in these kinds of neighborhoods, something that goes beyond recent state housing law. The city needs to prioritize housing on Solano Avenue. It's frankly embarrassing, I believe, that at the same time the city boldly identified new sites on Solano Avenue for the housing element for high density housing. A property not on the list at 1600 Solano came before this body begging to build high density housing there. If the city is going to allow and encourage 200+ unit developments with 0 parking spaces on San Pablo Avenue, developments that the city attorney has told me and I've shared previously with you will negatively impact residents nearby, then the city needs to be more aggressive to spread out the positive and negative impacts of high density housing. Is there any data on vacant housing units in Albany? I've heard about some cities that experiencing speculative investors buying condos and sitting on them, waiting for the prices to increase. I thank you for working on this and sharing this information with the public.
Thank you. And I believe we have one more speaker.
Yes, Clay Larson, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a comment actually in response to a comment Mr. Miller made at the March 23rd, the last housing element meeting. At that March meeting, in response to my comments concerning the proposal in the so-called specific plan to eliminate Albany's daylight plane requirements, Mr. Miller commented that daylight plane requirements were not typically employed where there are tall buildings. He characterized step-backs as a more practical solution that most cities are using. Mr. Miller didn't mention that both El Cerrito and Berkeley have daylight plane requirements. The consultant for the so-called specific plan has never mentioned this. Staff have never mentioned this. It's strange because we've seen all kinds of comparisons of Albany's and neighboring cities' development standards. I'm talking about height limits and densities and parking ratios and FAR. We've seen comparisons with Berkeley and El Cerrito throughout the two planning processes, but we have somehow conspicuously avoided that comparison with regards to daylight planes. I think it's unfortunate. I think that it's important to make this comparison in order to appreciate the special impact of development in Albany. But it's not too late. I think that an honest evaluation of the impact of eliminating daylight plane requirements should include a comparison with the requirements and circumstances in El Cerrito and Berkeley. I'm looking forward to that discussion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else from the public with a hand raised, so I'll bring it back to the commission. And I would like to ask who would like to make comments first. Anyone?
I'm happy to jump in, just maybe more of a question for Mr. Miller. I think at the end of your presentation, you had that slide up with the prompting questions. Just wondering if you could put those back up. Maybe it'll get the juices flowing here.
Yeah.
I'll jump in, and I'm not necessarily in response to these questions, but I did write down a few things that struck me when I started reading the document about outreach. I do think that we should have some robust outreach, and in the document, I think when Mr. Miller was speaking today, I liked his comments, but in the document, it seemed to reference mostly regular public meetings that we have, which I don't feel are really outreach. Most people in the city are not aware of all of the public meetings that are going on. And so when I think about outreach, I think about agencies that reach out to the organizations that exist in the city, the nonprofit organizations, the citizens organizations that exist in the city, and engage them in the hope that they can spread the word to their members. So I would hope that we're thinking about that we're thinking about actually reaching out to these organizations, some of which were mentioned by Mr. Miller tonight, and engaging them directly. Any and all of the organizations and nonprofit organizations that exist in the city, I think that would be great. And plus perhaps school organizations as well. And then, I think that I do think we have some more zoning tools on our belt, and it was mentioned in our materials that we could reconsider single-family zoning. As was mentioned by one of our speakers as well. And I think that looking towards just cause eviction rules would be great, and vacancy tax, and perhaps rules requiring landlords to take Section 8. Now, so I'll leave it with a couple of questions for staff right now before I get to the other commissioners. I know that the city council was discussing a vacancy tax of some sort. Does staff know if the council passed any sort of vacancy tax, or was it simply a discussion, and was it commercial or residential? Do you have any information on that?
I personally wasn't involved with that, so I'm not as well informed as I should be. I do know that that is something that the city attorney and some of my colleagues are working directly with the city manager on. So we can, okay. I should get an update on that. I'm sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head, but we would, whatever that is, we'll incorporate it. Okay, great. And then Section 8, I heard from someone that Berkeley has some laws about discrimination concerning Section 8, but I also heard then that the state passed some laws recently, maybe not that recently, concerning discrimination about Section 8. Do you have any information about those state laws? I'm sorry, I don't. Barry, do you have any background on that?
No, we can look into that, Commissioner Pilch, and see if we can come back with more information in the report. Okay, I'll see if I can do a little Googling while I'm here too. But I'll leave it there for now and turn it over to Commissioner Donaldson for comments or questions.
Yeah, a couple of little things. I was interested in the comments we heard from Margie Marks. I guess, as you said, Barry, we bring a planner's perspective to this. And she was talking about some tools that might be available that I'm really not much familiar with. It would be nice to know more about the pros and cons of that list of potential options that she brought forward. So I hope your outreach includes Albany Thrives Together, her organization, and we can find more of that. I can also speak a little bit as a landlord, actually, with Section 8. I've had really good luck with Section 8 in the past. And my problem with it is that it's not enough. There's not enough money there at all. The waiting list is huge. It's just huge. I think I don't know any way around that except to write your congressman. But it's a great program, and it promotes integration because you can it's transportable from one neighborhood to another, and you can have a Section 8 tenant in any neighborhood that you can that qualifies. And my personal experience with it was that it was a really good program, and it just needs to be greatly expanded. And I think the Alameda County Housing Authority is very capable of administering it, but they just don't have enough money from the feds to even come close to meeting the demand. So anyway, I just want to say that I completely support it. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up to that, I did a little bit of Googling. Apparently there is a California law, Fair Employment and Housing Act, that protects people from housing discrimination based on a bunch of things, including sources of income. So that seems to cover Section 8. If you Google something like California discrimination Section 8, I think a number of links will pop up about that. Which is great news. I don't know if it's a strong enough law, but it is great news. I also say that I was listening to a podcast recently that it did talk about the benefits to landlords about Section 8, which is that they have that guaranteed source of income, and from the Section 8 vouchers. So glad to hear that Commissioner Donaldson also had a good experience. Great. Anyone else? Commissioner Waddy.
Sure, I'll just chime in and to respond to some of the questions Barry had. I don't have a whole lot to add, and I would agree that I think this is a very complex issue, and it's also very interwoven. It's not like, you know, if we do X, this will advance fair housing and we'll see dramatic changes. You know, I think there are a multitude of issues, as you were mentioning before, from financing, and a whole slew of things that are not necessarily in sort of a zoning or a planning or a land use lens. But I do think part of what's really being asked of us is to solve our piece of the puzzle. And that's as much as what we can do. And I really do think when it comes to our piece of the puzzle, what it really comes down to is you know, housing diversity and housing options. I think when you're a city that's just chocked full of single family homes, you're going to see certain trends. And when you're a city that has a variety of housing typologies that allow for people at different stages of life and at different incomes throughout, you know, the economy to live, you're going to see, you know, improvements in fair housing or diversity in your community. And so I think from a land use lens, you know, the greater the diversity of our zoning controls that allow for the greatest amount of housing diversity lets people put in duplexes or fourplexes or, you know, higher density housing. And we have a lot of these different options scattered amongst our different census tracts. And it, you know, doesn't necessarily mean that every census tract is going to have high density housing allowed, but I think to be able to have multifamily housing throughout every census tract is important. And what I would point to, and again, like I'm not quite as off the top of my head nuanced on understanding our zoning map in every single census tract and where that breakdown comes in. But, you know, as somebody who was born and raised in Albany, it's very normal that you've got, you know, apartment buildings on, you know, around the corner from blocks that are all single family home, or the occasional duplex or quadplex in the middle of a block surrounded by single family homes. And it always just seemed natural and it seemed very normal. And so I think for us to really think about some of those patterns and those historical patterns, and we may have since then changed zoning to go away from that, but I actually think it's sort of a really great part of what Albany's fabric is. And I remember growing up when, you know, friends who lived in all of those different housing typologies, everything from an, you know, in-law unit to an apartment building to the towers on Albany Hill and single family homes. And that really did make up a richness of the people within our community. And so I do think when it comes to the land use lens, the thing that we're really good at, it's making sure that we have that housing, that zoning diversity, so that should somebody want to change what's on their property, you know, they don't have to ask special permissions, that it's something that's permissible and that we've given some objective standards for what does success look like if you want to build a 4-unit building here. And so I think that's really the best way we can, again, make our piece of the puzzle work. Again, you know, I think the challenge and what's to be determined in a lot of, especially within the Bay Area, a lot of these conversations about getting rid of single family zoning, that, you know, I think time will tell is, are there any unintended consequences about increasing the value of single family homes because it's becoming a more limited commodity? And is that actually having unintended consequences of jacking up the costs of those communities that do have very intact single family home stock, even if those zoning districts allow for multi-unit housing, you know, when they transact, are they transacting at a higher amount because they're single family homes? And that's just something I haven't at least seen enough data on to really see what those long-term implications are. But I think letting the market have the option and letting people know that, you know, they have the ability to increase density on this parcel if the parcel transacts, or, you know, as commenters have mentioned, you know, if a home is passed down and heirs want to sell the home, knowing that a future buyer could redevelop the site, I think is what we need to do. So that would just be my comment. I mean, I think there are a lot of other tools that get much more complex, everything that people have commented on from, you know, rent control and eviction controls. And I think although there's definitely a land use component to those, I think those are larger policy conversations that are to be held at either sort of a voter level or a city council level. One other thing that I would just suggest, and I don't think we've ever seen this, at least since I've been on the commission, as an issue, but is worthwhile at least maybe thinking about and putting it in there, is conversations around, are any of our actions resulting in evictions? So are there currently tenants living in a building, and as a result of us authorizing, you know, an addition or a remodel, is that person going to effectively be evicted because of the construction and then they're unable to move back because they've moved on in their life. And so I don't know if that's really much of a real issue in Albany, but it could be something that we look at. And I know other jurisdictions do have sort of controls or protections, or at least considerations or findings to be made about whether the home is an owner-occupied structure, or when there's a major alteration, or whether it's a renter-occupied building or unit. So that would just be my other food for thought as a way for us to be thinking about who is impacted by the land use decisions that we're making. That's all. Thanks.
Great. Excellent thoughts. Thank you. Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, I kind of look at it through the land use lens. So, but it is a much bigger problem than land use, like has been mentioned. And a lot of it has to do with tax policy, tax credits, financing, vouchers, federal subsidies, et cetera. I mean, we have our 15% inclusionary housing ordinance. And I don't know, it just seems like almost a flawed way to be going about it, but it's the only tool we've got, really. Whereas, I think we could be doing some other systematic way of building affordable housing that could be much better, instead of depending on an inclusionary ordinance that is subsidized by higher rents for the other residences in the development. I mean, there's got to be a better way to do it, but it's the only way we've got at the moment, it seems like. And I mean, I would agree with Commissioner Waddy that if you have a diverse, a set of housing types, you have a much more diverse set of residents. So that's why I'm, very much supportive of more units and different kinds of units. I think we could even include some single room occupancy type dwellings that we have not had in Albany that are very good for people on lower income, and kind of a transitional stepping stone for some. In general, I would support, as I've said before, upzoning, especially along Solano and in the along Brighton, that's very close to shopping, and BART, anything within half mile of BART would be a great candidate for upzoning. And then in general, upzoning R1 across the city to R2 at least. And then I've also noted that our R3 is not very different at all from R2, and a lot of its requirements or limits. So I think there could be a much better distinction there. I think other things that have been brought up about renter protections, eviction protections, all great ideas. I'm not sure that our commission is the best place for that. I think it's pretty much the city council where those decisions would be made. I really wouldn't consider like pulling back along San Pablo in our San Pablo specific plan. I would absolutely not want to pull back on our San Pablo plan. I would rather upgrade the rest of the city, and not pull back there. And then is there any data, I don't know if staff knows, how many vacancies we have in Albany, vacant houses, vacant apartments? I mean, I know in some cities it's quite big. San Francisco has a huge vacancy rate, whether people are just holding on them for appreciation reasons or for whatever, I don't know. But if those were to be occupied, it would actually help quite a bit with the housing crisis. I guess we'd have to know what the vacancy, how many vacancies there are, and what kind of impact a vacancy tax might have. But it might be worth looking into. Regarding Albany Hill, I've been advocating that we put Measure K on the ballot for years now. It just seems to be going very slowly. I know staff's been working on it, but that's basically in council's hands at this point. I think we have recommended as a body putting it on the ballot. But for some reason, it's not moving very fast, at least from my viewpoint, through the process to get it on the ballot. But I would like to see it on the ballot as fast as possible to have that whole Albany Hill upgraded at least the bottom part. I would prefer to see the bottom part developed, the upper part left as open space. So, you know, I don't really have much more to add, but, you know, I think we certainly can do what we can in terms of upgrading our zoning around the whole city as the best way forward. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify about Measure K, my understanding is that we are including that parcel in our housing element so that we can do the EIR for the entire housing element and thus do the EIR for the change of zoning for that parcel, and then we'll be set up to do Measure K in the next applicable election, which won't be this November, unfortunately, but can be the following election. So that's all in progress. But I share your concern with it happening more slowly than I'd like. And Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're talking again the cost burden question, which I think is the biggest question that I popped out of this to me. I agree with Ian about the concerns about the 15% inclusionary requirement for affordability. Really doesn't get us a lot. And as you know, I took offense with the project we saw last week. One of the reasons was they started out with their base project showing studio apartments, and somehow those studio apartments got expanded into a number of 2-bedroom apartments and 1-bedroom apartments. I would really like to see some zoning tools that might allow us to regulate proposed new developments in a way that helps the affordability overall, in addition to just the inclusionary part. In other words, I'm thinking if there's a market for it and if there's a need for it, we should be able to tell developers, you need a certain proportion of your project to be studios or 1-bedrooms, which are by nature, because they're smaller, more affordable. I suspect that the market is so big, the demand is so high that there are a big demand for studio apartments, a big demand for 1-bedroom apartments. And maybe as a city, through the housing element, maybe we'd be able to do more to regulate, to keep somewhat in balance the mix of type of units that and have some influence on the affordability that way. I really agree with Ian regarding the single room occupancy building. So we don't have any in Albany, and I think it would be a good project type to encourage in the housing element if we can. So I know those are some additional thoughts I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I have some thoughts. I wanted to respond to some of the excellent thoughts of my fellow council members as well. Yeah, we did, I believe, include SROs in either our general plan or our last housing element is something we don't want to exclude, at least, from the city. So that was a good thought, I think, on Commissioner McLeod's part. In terms of affordable housing, yeah, we need to build as much as we can, but there's really very few tools that we have because of lack of funding at the state level due to Prop 13, and the fact that the federal government kind of abandoned doing federal housing at some point, and that's one reason why we have Section 8, is that was kind of the replacement for the feds actually coming in and building housing. That's my understanding anyway. But yeah, so building affordable housing means you have these nonprofit housing developers who just have to scrape every bit of federal, state, and local money to and in grants and just like we're doing with the Saha project to put that together. And so there's no silver bullet there. We just have to, push every lever we can to get affordable housing, but there's not a lot of state and federal government support behind it right now, and that's why it's so slow. Yeah, I really appreciate the comments about diversity of housing options. Absolutely, that benefits us all. if any of us are lucky to own homes in Albany, then we are living in luxury housing. And so it struck when when that first struck me in the past year or so, I just thought, wow, we're really in some straits here. So I would like to see, as was pointed, one of the maps that really stuck out at me was the map showing the racial diversity. Well, a lot of different factors getting very, as someone mentioned, I think, getting very skewed towards the eastern part of the city. And that, as someone also mentioned, is where we have a couple of bus lines intersecting. We have bus line coming up Calusa. We have bus lines on Solano. We have, that part of the city is getting closer to North Berkeley BART. So I would really like to see us think about having more diverse housing options in that part of the city, and I think that would be really go towards affirmatively furthering fair housing, especially if we, we have Solano Avenue that we can, which absolutely would be appropriate for that, but also I think in the rest of the neighborhoods, thinking about, allow as I think Commissioner Wadi said, allowing fourplexes by right and that sort of thing. And then let the market decide where it can be built. Probably can't be built on a 25 by 100 lot, but if it can be built and someone wants to build it, I think that would be great. I think we should absolutely consider ending single family zoning because SB 9 I don't think is going to get us what we want. There's so many. It's very it's a very specific process for how you end up getting 4 units on a parcel, and I don't think many people will jump through those hoops to do that. So the city would actually have to zone for that in order to get more units per parcel. In terms of growth and density. Height limits is a very crude tool. And I think you see that coming out in some of the public comments because one of the things we've done on San Pablo is said we're going to have this height limits. Well, where the Albany Bowl project is, the height limits I think are very appropriate because it's across the street from the single family housing. It's kind of isolated. And it would have been great to see a site like where the senior housing is even be taller because that's kind of an isolated portion where you go high and you don't affect the neighbors very much. I think a better way to specify height controls and density is to do either form-based zoning where you take it parcel by parcel but what you want the buildings to look like and what heights you want, or by something that I've heard of just recently, and I don't know if there's a name for it, but where you set your height limits and density based on the adjoining properties. So that if you're next to a property, take for example in height control, if you're next to a property that's 20 feet tall, you can build 30 feet tall. You can build, say, 50% more than that. And then perhaps the next property that comes along can build to 40 feet or 45 feet, another 50% more than your 30 feet next to you. So you have a height control or density controls that allow you to grow organically, but not be out of scale with your neighboring properties. I don't know if there's many places that are doing this. I just happened to hear about it somewhere, but I think this would be a great way of managing growth, getting density, getting more units, while also not affecting your nearest neighbors in such a big way as like having an 8-story building next to a 2-story single-family residence. Okay, and so those are all, that's on the zoning side. On the side of other things we can do, anti-displacement measures, yes, I think we should look into those. Other cities are doing those, as was mentioned. You don't want to build a new building where people have been living and then not be able to have those people come back and live in that building. I think we don't want to displace people in that way. And in general, tenant protections should be on the table. Just cause eviction would be a next step. We don't have to do rent control, maybe not now, but a next step above what we have would be just making sure we have just cause eviction. I'm glad to see that the vacancy tax is already underway, so I support moving that forward. Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act is a great thing too. Can be a bit complicated. I think that effort is stalled in Berkeley for the moment, but it's an awesome thing to think about. So I guess finally, I think all these things should be on the table, and we shouldn't limit ourselves. We do have a crisis still on our hands, and let's spread the wealth. Let's spread the units throughout the city. And I'll stop there and see if anyone else has some other follow-up comments. If not, well, we're getting towards the witching hour of 10 o'clock, so it seems like this is probably a good place to leave it unless the consultants or staff have any more clarifications or questions of us.
I just want to thank the commission for their input on this, and also thank the members of the public who spoke up and will be reaching out to our organizations to make those contacts. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes, thank you very much. That'll be great. So that'll conclude item 7.3. Thank you, Mr. Miller, as well. And under item 8 on our agenda, new business, we have none. Item 9 is a notice of the next meeting, which will be May 25th in 2 weeks. And if there's nothing else, then meeting adjourned. And